The following clip is an excerpt from a video I made back in 2020 called 1984 is 2020, The Death of Freedom Has Come. The video is a book review and analysis of George Orwell's classic dystopian novel 1984 and is an attempt to show how the concepts in the book manifest themselves in the real world today. If you haven't read the book, just know that the main character's name is Winston Smith, and he lives in a place called Oceania, which is a totalitarian police state that maintains its power through malicious irony, lies, thought policing, brainwashing, destruction of history, propaganda, torture, and surveillance, among other things. Just think North Korea. It's as close to a copy of Orwell's nightmare regime as you can get. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I here present to you the clip that you actually wanted to watch when you clicked on this video. The first section, the first topic I want to go over with regards to the similarities between Oceania and America 2020 has to do with doublethink. There are two passages I would like to read regarding doublethink, and I will make my case for why this brainwashing is very, very prevalent in society today. Now, this first passage comes on page 214 of my edition of 1984, and it has to do with the definition of doublethink. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to go over these various examples of doublethink in our world today. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. The party intellectual knows in which direction his memories must be altered. He therefore knows that he is playing tricks with reality. But by the exercise of doublethink, he also satisfies himself that reality is not violated. The process has to be conscious, or it would not be carried out with sufficient precision. But it also has to be unconscious, or it would bring with it a feeling of falsity and hence of guilt. Doublethink lies at the very heart of Ingsoc, English socialism, since the essential act of the party is to use conscious deception while retaining the firmness of purpose that goes with complete honesty. To tell deliberate lies while genuinely believing in them. To forget any fact that has become inconvenient, and then when it becomes necessary, again, to draw it back from oblivion for just so long as it is needed. To deny the existence of objective reality, and all the while to take account of the reality which one denies. All this is indispensably necessary. Even in the using of the word doublethink, it is necessary to exercise doublethink. For by using the word, one admits that one is tampering with reality. By a fresh act of doublethink, one erases this knowledge. And so on indefinitely, with the lie always one leap ahead of the truth. Ultimately, it is by means of doublethink that the party has been able, and may, for all we know, continue to be able for thousands of years, to arrest the course of history. Since that passage, in fact, talks about the party, I'm going to give specific examples with regards to the two political parties in this country, that is America, and I'm going to give examples on both sides of where doublethink is just plain as day. So how about we start with the right? I'll give you three examples on the right. So the first one, free speech. The right is always like, free speech, free speech, free speech, we need to protect free speech, blah, 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 and they're right, we do. And they often speak in terms, Trump is defending free speech, he's fighting for free speech, and it's great. And in some cases, yes, he has been. But what I find so fascinating, and this occurred a couple months ago whenever Trump was repeating this, Trump says, you know, he's for free speech and everything, and then he simultaneously says that he wants to put people in prison for a year for burning the American flag. Okay, and what's fascinating, and this is where the real doublethink comes in, and this is where I first realized this, I was having a conversation with a Republican about this. And we were watching this rally. I believe it was the rally by, I think it was the Mount Rushmore thing, maybe? I'm not sure. Trump said this, and I said, that is not good. And then the Republican in the room was like, well, wait a minute, but no, America, the flag is more than just a flag, it's an idea, it should be. And I was like, no. He didn't have an argument, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, I even got him to basically say that it's okay to burn Bibles, but it's definitely not okay to burn the American flag. Which is totally contradictory to his principles. But I basically got him to say that. And I don't think he really believes that right now anymore, but It was in an instance of doublethink. You can't be for free speech and then simultaneously be like, yeah, we should throw people in prison for burning the American flag. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. Now for a second example on the right for doublethink, it also has to pertain to Trump. You guys remember a couple years ago, back when Newt Gingrich ran for president initially, I believe it was 2012, it came up in debates. Newt Gingrich had 3 wives. And it was this big scandal, and conservatives, you know, religious people were like, oh, he's not fit for the presidency. And in many ways, I think that Newt Gingrich lost because he had that record with women. What I find so fascinating is that all these people were like, oh, that's so despicable of him to have that kind of history. They said that then. No, this wasn't that long ago. But then when Trump came around, they immediately were like, so what if he's had 3 wives and cheated on every single one of them? I mean, you know, it's like, you can't say a president needs to be a moral, you know, character who, you know, represents traditional values and then act like Trump represents those things when he absolutely does not represent any of those things. It's just ridiculous. It's doublethink. And now for my third example of doublethink on the right, and I will get to the left. My third example of doublethink on the right is with regards to the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So everyone knows Joe Biden at one point in the debate went, just shut up, man. And he got a bunch of flack for that. What I find so hilarious about that is I was talking again with Trump fans, and they were like, Biden told the president to shut up. How terrible is that? And I went, wait a minute. Trump tells people to shut up all the time. He was calling Joe Biden, there's nothing smart about you, Joe, the whole debate. He was being unbelievably disrespectful. Trump has been disrespectful his entire life. It's doublethink. You can't be like, well, Joe Biden needs to be respectful, but Donald Trump, he can be him, which is disrespectful. I mean, he's like the personification of disrespect. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the 3 examples I have of doublethink on the left. So I'm old enough to remember the early days of the coronavirus pandemic. I remember a specific topic coming up and a lot of political conversations. This specific topic was the Defense Production Act. And a lot of Republicans were very happy that Trump was not really using it. He only used it once, as far as I know. And a bunch of liberals were very upset that Trump was not using the Defense Production Act, which, as I understand it, is basically an act that gives the president the power to, and the government the power to force corporations to make things that they don't traditionally make and to compel them to make these things. As I understand it, I could be wrong about that, but that's how it was explained to me. And I remember the hilariosity of the situation was, on the one hand, liberals were saying, Trump is a dictator. He's a monstrous dictator. He's going to bring totalitarianism to this country. And then, when the Defense Production Act came up, they said, Trump needs to use that and enforce the Defense Production Act. They hate Trump for being a dictator, but they want him simultaneously to commit dictatorial acts, like forcing companies to make things. It's doublethink. That's what it is. It's you can't say I hate dictators, but Trump, you need to be a dictator right now, otherwise I hate you. I mean, it just doesn't. It's insane. Now for my second example of doublethink with regards to the left. It's the protest, everybody. I remember, again, in the early days of the pandemic, before the whole racial tensions skyrocketed, there was a protest. It made national news. It was actually a pretty small protest, and I believe it was in Michigan, of a whole bunch of people. I don't know, not too many, but, a decent amount of people gathered around, I believe it was the Michigan State Capitol, and they were protesting the lockdown. They were very upset. People were out there with signs, and I remember the media, everybody was like, golly, you people just go home. If you want to protest, then you need to do it and be safe. Don't get in these groups and everything. You need to be cautious. This is stupid. Why? I remember the media just mocked all of these people relentlessly. Now it's not the time to protest. Now is the time to stay safe. stay home and not spread the COVID pandemic. So that was the message then. And then about a month later after that, George Floyd was killed. And then the media decided, and the left in particular decided, that, you know what? Protests are more important than the COVID pandemic. In fact, tens of thousands of people, you should go out into the streets, hang out, and get sick. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. On the one hand, protests, you can't protest the lockdown. In fact, you should be arrested for trying to protest the lockdown. But if you want to protest racial injustice, then go out into the streets, tens of thousands, and the COVID pandemic, it's not going to be a problem there. It was absolute insanity. And I remember, after those initial protests began, all of a sudden, spikes and spikes and spikes of coronavirus cases popped up in all these states that had these protests. And I remember all the media, it was like cognitive dissonance. It was doublethink, forgetting that they were acting like this must be from some other thing. It must be from reopening alone. Or, because there was all this controversy with regards to reopening states. They're like, well, it must be that. It can't have anything to do with the, tens of thousands of people storming the streets all day and all night. Now for my third example of doublethink with regards to the left, I'm going to bring up Trump and Joe Biden again. And this happened actually pre-pandemic. Everyone's pretty much forgotten about this story. But Joe Biden was, of course, he was accused of sexually assaulting a woman years ago. And it came up this year. And what was hilarious was the left for years has been saying Trump, he's sexual assaults or all these things are horrible, or they basically accuse everybody, and Trump very well may be those things. But for instance, actually to draw a better analogy, it's between what the left did to Brett Kavanaugh and how they treated Joe Biden. So Brett Kavanaugh's accuser never presented any material evidence that he actually did anything to her. It was a he said, she said situation. No evidence was presented really on either side, except for Brett Kavanaugh did have like a very well-organized calendar, and there was no evidence anywhere to suggest that he did what she said, other than she sounded very confident and she didn't sound like she was lying. That was the only evidence that anyone could find with regards to Christine Blasey Ford's claims against Brett Kavanaugh. But the left determined, they were like basically fighting for the idea that Brett Kavanaugh was a rapist, even though the allegation wasn't even of rape. But they were fighting they were just trying to stop him from getting into the Supreme Court. They were fighting tooth and nail to defame this guy based on just about no evidence, no corroborative eyewitnesses, even though Christine Blasey Ford said that there were. None of them corroborated her story, yada, yada, yada. So the left was like, they were determined that, Brett Kavanaugh was a bad guy. But then Joe Biden gets accused of sexual assault. And it is a more credible claim. I don't know if it's fully credible, but Joe Biden did know this woman, and she did work for him at the time that she said that she worked for him. And there was more evidence with regards to Joe Biden than Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know if either of the allegations were good or not. All I know is that the media coverage on the left of Joe Biden's sexual assault thing was, hey, we need due process, we need evidence. Whereas with Brett Kavanaugh, we don't need any of that shit. It was absolute, to the core, doublethink. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to the next section, I do want to read one other passage from 1984 with regards to doublethink, just in case you haven't understood the concept. I'm sure you already do, but I think it's a really great passage that I think is worth reading. I'm not really going to go over it other than to read it, but this is on page 35 of my edition, and it reads, Winston's mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce consciousness. and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of the word doublethink.